July 3, 1943, Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. The air was thick enough to chew. It smelled of oil, sweat, and salt carried by the Pacific wind that never truly stopped blowing. Every few minutes, the faint echo of distant gunfire rolled through the jungle like thunder that refused to die. The once green paradise of coconut palms and clear beaches had turned into a smoking, cratered scar, a place where survival was measured not in days, but in nights endured. Down near the battered runway of Henderson Field, a lone figure moved among the wreckage. His name was Jack Hensley, a Kansas farmer turned marine mechanic. His skin was browned by the island sun, his shirt soaked through with sweat, his hands cracked and blackened from fuel and dust. To most men there, Guadalcanal was hell. To Jack, it was something else, a challenge. He was never supposed to be there this long. Originally attached to a logistics unit, his job was to repair trucks, keep the generators running, and fix whatever broke that could still be fixed. But the war had other plans. The island was under constant attack from Japanese Zeros that came shrieking down out of the night sky, strafing the runway, bombing fuel dumps, and tearing apart tents while men dove for cover. Every raid left a little less of Guadalcanal standing, and a little more of Jack burning inside. He'd seen fields destroyed before. Not by war, but by locusts back home. Thousands of insects darkening the Kansas sky, devouring months of work in minutes. He had fought them with whatever he could, mirrors, smoke, strange contraptions no one else understood. It wasn't science. It was instinct. And now, halfway across the world, under a sky full of enemies instead of insects, that instinct was beginning to stir again. That night, while others tried to sleep through the heat and the drone of mosquitoes, Jack sat on an overturned fuel drum near the airstrip. The horizon glowed faintly red, the afterburn of another bombing run on the coast. In the distance, the jungle hummed with life, indifferent to the men killing each other within it. Jack stared at the moon's reflection in a puddle of rainwater near his boot. The light shimmered, split, and danced when he stirred it with a stick. Something clicked in his mind. Birds chased light. Locusts followed reflection. Planes followed what they could see. What if, he thought, what if I could trick them into seeing something that isn't there? The idea took root before dawn. Before this incredible story continues, if you love forgotten war stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to WW2 Frontline Legends, the home of unsung heroes and untold battles that shaped our world. Tap that button, drop a like, and comment below where you're watching from: Texas, London, Sydney, Manila, or somewhere out on the open sea. I read every single one, and your support keeps the spirit of these legends alive. Now let's get back to Guadalcanal. By sunrise, Jack was scavenging. He collected broken mirrors from wrecked trucks, aluminum panels from crashed bombers, and the reflective glass from destroyed searchlights. When anyone asked what he was doing, he simply said, "Trying something." Most laughed. Others shrugged and went back to work. Guadalcanal had seen plenty of crazy. One more mad idea didn't make much difference. Day by day, his project took shape. He built a patchwork field of poles and frames, each draped with reflective material angled toward the sky. From a distance, it looked like a field of crooked scarecrows, ghostly silhouettes standing guard over the jungle edge. The men nicknamed it Hensley's crazy trick. But Jack didn't mind. He worked quietly, adjusting angles, testing how the sun struck the panels, how the moonlight shimmered on them at night. When dusk fell, he'd light small fires behind the mirror field, watching the reflections dance across the trees. To anyone else, it looked like nonsense, a madman's art project in a war zone. But to Jack, it was something more. He was studying deception, the kind nature had shown him long ago. The first test came on July 19th, just before midnight. The air was heavy with humidity, the kind that made gunpowder clump and tempers short. The sirens wailed without warning, the sound every man on the island had come to dread. In seconds, the night exploded. The Japanese had returned. Engines roared in the distance, a rising snarl cutting through the darkness. Men scattered for cover. Anti-aircraft crews scrambled to their guns, eyes searching for the glint of enemy wings. Then a strange thing happened. As the Zeros descended low over the jungle, their tracers cutting red lines through the night, several broke formation, banking sharply toward Jack's mirror field. The reflections of fire and moonlight rippled off the panels, creating the illusion of movement, of depth, a ghost runway shimmering beneath them. From the lookout post, one Marine later swore he saw a plane dive straight into the tree line chasing that light. Another clipped the ridge, and went down in flames. By the time the rest of the formation pulled up, anti-aircraft fire had already filled the sky. When dawn came, 3 wrecks were found scattered through the jungle, none of them anywhere near the real airstrip. The men couldn't explain it. Some said luck. Others called it a miracle. But Jack said nothing. He just walked among the twisted wreckage of his mirror field, straightening bent poles, cleaning the soot off glass, and taking notes in a small weather-beaten notebook. That day, even the officers took notice. Colonel Whitmore himself came to see it. He watched the strange setup shimmer in the morning sun, scratching his chin. "You telling me this pile of junk fooled the Imperial Japanese Navy?" he asked. Jack only replied, "Sir, sometimes it's not what you have, it's what they think you have." The field became part of the perimeter. Not officially. No one wanted to put their name on such an unorthodox idea, but word spread fast. Soldiers from nearby units came to look. Some laughed. Some whispered. And some swore that at night, the reflections moved even when there was no wind. Jack kept modifying his invention. He poured used engine oil into shallow trenches, creating shimmering pools that reflected light from flares. He strung wires with pieces of tinfoil that flickered like sparks. He even scavenged broken bulbs from bombed-out trucks, wiring them to a generator to make them flash intermittently like landing beacons. Slowly, piece by piece, the illusion evolved into something extraordinary. A phantom airstrip built out of scraps, sweat, and one man's stubborn belief that he could outsmart the enemy. Then came August 2nd, 1943, the night that changed everything. The Japanese arrived in force, more planes than anyone had seen in weeks. They came screaming over the ocean, their engines howling like a storm. The Marines braced for annihilation. But as the formation reached the coast, the pilots spotted what looked like a second airfield deep inland: lights. Flickering, fires burning, metallic reflections moving in the darkness. The illusion worked too well. The lead Zero broke formation, diving straight toward the false target. The rest followed. Within minutes, chaos erupted. Planes slammed into trees, into ridges, into each other. Tracer fire lit up the sky as the real anti-aircraft crews opened up from miles away. When the smoke cleared, the ground shook with the echo of distant explosions. It was over in less than 10 minutes. The next morning, wreckage was scattered across miles of jungle. Some said 26 planes went down in those 44 days. Others said more. Nobody knew for sure, only that the skies above Guadalcanal were finally quiet again. The mirror field became a legend. Soldiers from other islands heard the story and tried to replicate it, but none succeeded. Jack's combination of angles, smoke, and light was more art than science, born from instinct, not blueprints. The intelligence officers gave it a name: Operation Glintfield. It sounded official enough to make sense, but even they couldn't explain how a farmer's crazy trick had turned the tide of an air war. And yet, for all his brilliance, Jack remained the same: quiet, withdrawn, almost haunted. He spent hours at dusk sitting by the field, watching the fading sunlight shimmer on the mirrors. Some said he saw things others couldn't: phantom planes, perhaps, or the ghosts of men who never made it home. By the end of the summer, the war had moved on, but the legend of Jack Hensley's ghost airfield was just beginning to spread. A secret too strange to die, and too dangerous to forget. End of Section 1. Cliffhanger tone. Because what none of them knew was that Tokyo had already taken notice, and the Empire was preparing to send something far more dangerous than fighter planes to find out the truth behind the American ghost weapon. August 5th, 1943, Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. The rain hadn't stopped for days. Sheets of it drifted sideways, carried by winds that turned the runway into a swamp of mud and twisted metal. The Pacific storms were merciless, thunder so loud it drowned out the sound of generators, lightning that flashed across the horizon like artillery fire. But even in the downpour, the mirror field still glimmered faintly beneath its tarp covers. The Marines patrolling the edge of the jungle said it was eerie. They claimed that when lightning struck the coast, the reflection from the field looked like a signal, a ghostly pulse echoing back toward the sea. Some believed it was haunted. Others whispered that it was alive. Jack Hensley said nothing. He simply worked, tightening bolts, wiping condensation off the panels, and keeping his strange invention breathing through the storm. He had stopped thinking of it as a trick. It had become something else, a weapon built from the same simplicity that once fed his family's fields. The reflection of light, the bending of sight, the way the human eye, and even the pilot's trained mind, could be fooled by motion and shadow. What began as a farmer's curiosity had turned into one of the strangest pieces of psychological warfare the Pacific had ever seen. Reports started spreading through the command chain. Interception logs noted unusual Japanese flight patterns. Squadrons would dive toward jungle interiors, only to vanish from radar or crash. Recon photos showed smoke plumes rising from areas where no Allied installations existed. Intelligence officers circled the same coordinates again and again. The same patch of jungle Jack had turned into a mirage. Within weeks, whispers reached headquarters in Brisbane. Allied analysts thought it might be the first instance of a visual deception field, a concept so unorthodox that most dismissed it as a coincidence. Yet, the kill reports told another story. 26 confirmed aircraft losses in 44 days, none directly attributed to air combat. The data made no sense, but the results were undeniable. On August 8th, the first group of U.S. Army engineers arrived on the island under the pretense of inspecting fortifications. In truth, they came to study what they called Hensley's apparition field. They photographed every angle, every reflection, every shimmer of light that drifted through the morning fog. Jack stood nearby as they scribbled notes and measured distances. He didn't speak much, he didn't need to. The field spoke for itself. They asked him how he'd designed it. He said he hadn't, it had designed itself. The rain, the sun, the smoke, all of it had taught him what worked. He had simply listened. The engineers didn't understand. They were men of math and steel, not instinct and earth. But when they sent their report back to command, one line stood out. Potential prototype for strategic deception. Recommend classification under Operation Glintfield. The name stuck. By mid-August, Glintfield became a ghost entry in Allied records, a phantom project with no funding trail, no personnel roster, and no official origin. Its creator remained anonymous in reports. Jack Hensley was now just engineer number 47, a man who built illusions and then faded back into the fog. But the enemy had begun to notice too. August 12, 1943, Rabaul, New Britain. In a smoky room filled with maps and ashtrays, Japanese intelligence officers examined aerial photographs captured by reconnaissance aircraft. The prints showed strange reflections deep inland from Guadalcanal, shimmering shapes that looked like hidden airstrips. Pilots reported being drawn toward the lights before losing visibility and control. The Imperial Command believed it to be a new Allied radar weapon, something capable of distorting instruments and luring planes off course. Tokyo ordered an investigation. A small reconnaissance unit, the Koku Kantai 25th Technical Division, was dispatched to locate and destroy the source. Their orders were simple: find the light. Silence it. Back on Guadalcanal, Jack sensed something had changed. The raids had stopped, but scouts reported unusual movement offshore. Fast boats seen at night, faint glimmers of light near the reef. Someone was watching. Jack began dismantling parts of his field, moving reflective panels deeper into the jungle, creating decoys of the decoy itself. He knew that when the enemy came, they wouldn't come from the sky. They'd come crawling through the mud, searching for ghosts. For the next 10 days, the island grew unnaturally quiet. No raids, no sirens, only the jungle's slow breathing. It was the silence before a storm, and Jack felt it in his bones. He barely slept. He sat beneath the tarp of his workshop, carving notches into his notebook, marking patterns of wind and moonlight. The field had become his obsession, a living thing that required care, understanding, and faith. Then, on the night of August 23rd, the storm broke. At 2:14 a.m., distant explosions rippled through the coastal ridge. Patrols reported gunfire near the northern perimeter, not from above, but from within the jungle. Jack grabbed his flashlight and sprinted toward the mirror field. The air reeked of gasoline and rain. He could see figures moving through the trees, shadows illuminated by flashes of gunfire. The Japanese reconnaissance unit had landed under the cover of darkness. Their mission was to destroy what they believed to be a radar station. But as they crept through the jungle, they stumbled into a maze of mirrors and fires. Their flashlights caught their own reflections, bouncing light back into their faces. Confused, they fired blindly, revealing their positions. Marines hidden nearby returned fire, and the jungle erupted in chaos. By dawn, it was over. 12 Japanese soldiers lay dead, 2 captured. Among their belongings was a map marked with a red circle, the coordinates of Jack's mirror field. They had come for him. The incident was immediately classified. Officially, it never happened. Unofficially, The success of the Ghost airfield spread through Allied intelligence like wildfire. Reports were sent to Washington and London. Some believed it was the first proof that psychological deception could defeat air power. Others dismissed it as a fluke. But the legend was too good to ignore. Within weeks, engineers began experimenting with similar techniques across the Pacific. Fake airfields made from painted plywood, mirrored lagoons, and controlled fires designed to trick enemy bombers. But none worked quite like Hensley's. His relied not on machinery, but on the natural chaos of reflection and instinct. It was an artist's weapon, one that couldn't be replicated by engineers or explained by scientists. Jack himself grew quieter with each passing day. The officers praised him, but he avoided the attention. He wasn't built for medals or meetings. He returned to his small tent at the edge of the jungle, spending nights staring into the broken glass of a mirror he kept from the first prototype. Some said he could still see flashes of light even when the field was shut down. Others said the reflection had changed, that it showed not his face, but something else. By early September, Operation Glintfield was relocated. The field was dismantled, its pieces packed into crates labeled spare parts. Jack was reassigned to another island, his project sealed under military secrecy. Few of the men who served with him ever saw him again. Those who did said he looked older, distant, as if the war had burned the color out of him. But the mirror field's legend didn't die with its removal. Japanese propaganda began referring to the American Ghost weapon, claiming the Allies had developed a new kind of optical warfare. The irony was perfect. The Empire had been fooled by nothing more than light, smoke, and a farmer's stubborn imagination. Years later, when declassified files emerged, researchers discovered the strangest detail of all. The Japanese had tried to copy the trick. On several islands near Rabaul, they built their own phantom fields, using bamboo, glass, and firelight. But their replicas never worked. Their pilots crashed, their reflections misaligned, and soon the experiment was abandoned. What they didn't understand was that Jack's secret wasn't in the materials, it was in the mind. He didn't build illusions. He built belief. And as the Pacific War moved northward, the name Hensley faded into rumor, a ghost among ghosts. His field, his notebooks, and his mirrors were lost somewhere in the shuffle of classified archives. But for those who were there, who saw 26 enemy planes vanish into the night because of one man's crazy trick, the memory remained like the glint of light on water, impossible to hold, impossible to forget. Because years later, long after the war ended, strange reports began to surface from Kansas, flashes of light over wheat fields, late at night, on a farm owned by a man named Hensley. April 1946, Hiawatha, Kansas. The war was over. Across the plains, spring wheat swayed under skies so wide and silent they seemed almost holy. America was healing, factories retooled, letters stopped coming in black envelopes, and victory banners faded in the sun. But one man, thousands of miles from Guadalcanal, hadn't quite come home. Not fully. Jack Hensley's farm sat 5 miles outside of town, a stretch of land that looked ordinary to anyone passing by. A red barn, a silo, rows of fence posts stretching toward the horizon. But neighbors said that sometimes, at night, you could see faint flashes of light out there. Not lightning, not fireflies, just glimmers, like the ghost of something metallic catching the moon. He never spoke much about the war. When asked what he'd done, he'd shrug and say, maintenance. But the walls of his barn told another story. Hidden behind stacks of feed and tools were the remnants of his mirror field, bent panels, cracked glass, and a weathered notebook filled with sketches of angles, reflections, and wind patterns. On the first page, in shaky handwriting, he'd written one line. Light is loyal to no one. In town, people called him the quiet veteran. He came to church on Sundays, sold his grain like any other farmer, and returned home before sunset. But those who knew him noticed the way he'd stop and stare at reflections, puddles, windows, even the chrome of passing trucks, as if searching for something that wasn't there. In the summer of 1947, a military jeep rolled up his dirt road. 2 men in uniform stepped out, wearing insignia he didn't recognize. They said they were from Washington, researching a classified wartime program called Operation Glintfield. They asked him to describe how he built the ghost field. Jack just smiled faintly and said, "It built itself." They pressed for details, schematics, angles, materials. He gave them none. He knew they wouldn't understand. When they left, one of the men turned and said, "You know, Mr. Hensley, the Air Force is developing something similar, radar reflectors. They say your idea might have changed how we see the sky. Jack nodded but didn't answer. He just watched as their jeep disappeared into the dust. That night, the lights returned. Neighbors swore they saw a glow rising from his fields. Not fire, not lanterns, just a strange, cold shimmer. The same way Guadalcanal's jungle must have looked under the moon. Some said he was testing something again. Others said he was haunted. Jack never denied it. Back in Washington, Operation Glintfield remained buried under higher-profile projects. It became one of those footnotes historians skipped, overshadowed by atomic headlines and Cold War inventions. But in 1953, an analyst cross-referenced Japanese records captured after the war and found something remarkable. The enemy had, in fact, documented the phantom airfield of Guadalcanal. According to intercepted transmissions, Imperial pilots believed the Allies had developed a new electromagnetic weapon that disrupted their vision, a blindness light. They even attempted to replicate it using glass shards and bamboo frames. None of their versions worked. The phenomenon remained a mystery. One report ended with the chilling line: "The enemy uses light as if it were alive." That discovery reignited interest. Scientists from MIT and Langley tried to recreate Hensley's setup in controlled environments. They calculated angles, ran simulations, and even flew drones over mirror grids to mimic the effect. The results were inconsistent. Without Hensley's intuition, his farmer's sense of wind, sun, and timing, the illusion refused to come alive. To them, it was physics. To Jack, it had always been instinct. Years later, when declassified photos surfaced, veterans recognized the field instantly. Some wept, others laughed, and one engineer wrote in the margin of his report, "Sometimes genius looks like madness until it works." But by then, Hensley was gone. November 17, 1956, Hiawatha, Kansas. The first snow had fallen early that year. The fields were bare, the barn locked tight. When a neighbor came to deliver feed, he found Jack's house dark, the front door slightly open. Inside, the fire had burned out hours earlier. On the table lay his old weathered notebook and a small mirror propped upright against a lantern. Jack was gone. No sign of struggle, no note. Just footprints leading out toward the field and stopping halfway. When the sheriff searched the area, he found rows of mirrors half buried in frost, angled perfectly toward the horizon. Their surfaces caught the morning light and scattered it into a dozen directions, a ghostly sunrise built by human hands. They never found him. Only his hat, resting on a fence post. Years later, when historians pieced together the story of Operation Glintfield, they realized the deeper irony. The Japanese reconnaissance team that had died in the jungle wasn't the only one to chase a reflection. So had history itself. The truth about Jack Hensley was never recorded, never officially recognized. His invention vanished into rumor and myth, an invisible contribution to victory, built by a man who never sought it. But for those who knew, the memory endured. To the Marines who watched enemy planes crash into phantom targets, he was the farmer who fought without firing a shot. To the engineers who tried to replicate his creation, he was a problem they could never solve. And to the generations that came after, who looked up at a peaceful sky and took it for granted, he was the reason they could. His story became one of those whispered legends, half fact, half mystery, told in barracks, classrooms, and late-night campfires among veterans who remembered Guadalcanal not for the battles, but for the light. Some said, on certain nights, when the moon was full and the air perfectly still, you could stand in the middle of those Kansas fields and see it, a faint shimmer rippling across the dark, like a promise the earth still kept. Others swore it was just the wind, but those who had seen what Jack built knew better. They knew that somewhere, the line between invention and miracle had blurred. Epilogue, Reflections from the Past. In 1972, long after the last file on Operation Glintfield had been stamped declassified, a young historian from the Smithsonian tracked down Jack's nephew. He still lived on the same farm, still growing wheat, still seeing flashes of light on the horizon. When asked if the stories were true, about the mirrors, the planes, the ghosts, the nephew smiled and pointed toward the barn. Inside, hanging from the rafters, was one of Jack's original panels. Its surface, dull with age, caught a beam of sunlight through the cracks in the roof. For a moment, the light split into a dozen reflections, scattering across the wooden walls like a silent salute. The historian wrote later, "In that barn, I realized I wasn't looking at technology. I was looking at faith, the belief that one man's idea, however strange, could bend the chaos of war toward survival. And maybe that was Jack's greatest trick of all. Not the mirrors, not the illusions, but his refusal to believe that any battle, no matter how desperate, was unwinnable. Outro, the legacy of a forgotten hero. Jack Hensley never received a medal. He never asked for one. But his idea, born in the mind of a farmer staring at the moonlight over ruined fields, outlived him. It inspired decoy operations in Korea, Cold War radar tests, and even early stealth research decades later. Somewhere in the chain of invention that shaped modern warfare, a farmer's crazy trick became part of the invisible fabric of history. And maybe that's the way he would have wanted it, quiet, unseen, but always there when the light hits just right. If stories like this remind you that courage doesn't always wear medals, that sometimes the smallest ideas change the biggest wars, then help keep these forgotten legends alive. Please share this video, drop a like, and subscribe to WW2 Frontline Legends. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, the United States, Britain, Australia, the Philippines, Germany, or anywhere across the world. Every comment keeps the memory of men like Jack Hensley shining a little brighter, even decades after the light first fell.